Should you call yourself an alcoholic after you've quit drinking? If not, what then? That's the question this week. I'm Kevin O'Hara for alcoholmastery.com. For me, alcohol was a part of my past. It was something that I used to do. Now, fair enough, by the time I stopped using alcohol, it had become an integral part of my life. So just stopping alcohol wasn't enough. I had to do a lot of work in eliminating all the connections from my life. Now, that included me thinking about myself as a drinker. That doesn't disappear overnight. To stop thinking of yourself as a drinker, you have to stop drinking first and foremost. Then you have to tell yourself you're not a drinker. You have to tell yourself this over and over again. Now, you need to do this because your past habitual behavior is still trying to kick in all along, even when you've stopped drinking. Your triggers are still going to be firing, which is the first step in your old programming. That's the first step that kicks everything off. When this first step fires, your initial reaction is to go to the next step and then the next, following the sequence that you've always followed from, opening a can of beer or whatever it is, sitting down in your favorite spot and leading you to using alcohol and getting drunk. But you don't drink anymore, so you have to tell yourself that you don't drink. You have to tell yourself that you're a non-drinker. Now, in the beginning, you're not going to believe this yourself. Not really. You've got all the enthusiasm for it. You've got the determination to do it. You've got your reasons to quit. But underneath it all is still that triggering mechanism, that programming, that click, click, whir of the automatic habitual behavior that's been built up over years and years. Now, this is very disconcerting in the beginning. I get this from a lot of people and I understand it myself. It's like you've got one side of your brain pulling in one direction and the other side pulling in the opposite direction. With the best will in the world, the habit is still, it's still going to be strong, especially just in those first few days and weeks. Now, that's what makes habits so sticky in the first place, and it makes them hard to break. And it's good that your habits are doing that, but just not good for your bad habits, if you know what I mean. So you keep telling yourself that you're a non-drinker, that you don't drink anymore, you don't use alcohol. And the more you tell yourself that you're a non-drinker, the more that you're going to believe it instinctually underneath it all, and the less you're going to have this internal conflict. So what do you think is going to happen if you tell yourself that you're an alcoholic, that you'll always be an alcoholic, that all it takes is this one drink and you'll be right back where you started? What do you think it's going to do if you believe that you've got a disease that can't be cured, that it's a part of some fundamentally flawed genetic code that you've inherited from one of your ancestors? Now, I used to smoke, right? I don't call myself a smoker anymore or an ex-smoker. I only say I don't smoke. I've become a vegetarian. I don't eat meat. Now, I don't tell people I'm a meat eater. I don't say I'm an ex-meat eater. When I was a young lad, I used to wet the bed, when I was small. No, I don't still call myself a bedwetter. You are what you believe you are. If you believe you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. No two ways about it, even if you don't drink alcohol. Now, that one thought will have a knock-on effect in many other areas of your life. If you believe you're an alcoholic, you're going to see alcohol as a threat, right? You'll see bars and drinkers and supermarket shelves and alcohol bottles and advertising. This is all going to be one big threat, threatening you all the time because it's there. You'll see yourself as damaged goods. You'll see yourself as weak, limited, trapped, whatever, This is also going to affect how you think about your other abilities in other areas of your life. Now, just as we're manipulated into believing that we're doing the normal thing by drinking this poison, we're also manipulated into believing that when we stop doing this thing, when we stop taking this poison, that there's something wrong with us, that we're the ones who just can't handle it anymore. We can't take a drink, that we must have a bad genetic makeup, that we've got a disease, or that we're an alcoholic, is what everyone wants to call us. Now, is that the way we look at any people who stop taking any other drug. You know, look at smokers who quit smoking, and you know, nobody says that they must have some genetic abnormality, that they're quitting because they can't handle the nicotine or they've got a disease. You know, what about heroin users or cocaine users? What about the people who are addicted to eating junk food? When they stop eating this crap and they lose all the weight, people don't automatically say, oh well, you know, they stopped eating junk food because they've got a mental disease, you know, they've got a genetic malfunction or it's in the family. You know, we do none of that. We smack people on the backs and we applaud these people for finally coming to their senses, for finally doing something that everyone else knows is bad for you. You know, more and more people are stopping smoking now, so it's easy for people to go, yeah, it's bad for you. You know, good for you for stopping. You know, more and more people are stopping eating junk food because they know it's bad for you. So yeah, it's easy to smack you. And it's dead easy to say to a heroin addict, yeah, you've done really well to kick that habit, you know. It's a bad thing that you've been doing, and if you want to live a good life, you've got to get rid of it. But this wasn't always the case. We didn't always look at heroin as bad, for instance. You know, it used to be sold in chemists, in pharmacies across the world. You know, America, England. Doctors used to recommend their favourite brands of cigarettes. You know, you've seen the advertisements. And fast food used to be an invention that promised a better way of life, you know, letting people unhook from the drudgery of the kitchen and giving them this freedom to eat what they wanted with very little fuss and, you know, just giving them great tasting food, lots of fat and salt and sugar. Times change. You know, we're surrounded by people who are brainwashed into consuming alcohol, this drug alcohol, as if it were a normal part of our lives. Every which way we turn, we're being manipulated by companies who only see us as a market, as an open wallet, as a number at the end of a balance sheet. And it's the same with the quit alcohol industry, by the way, so be careful there. Because this manipulation has been happening all our lives, it takes a long time and usually some very uncomfortable events for us to see through, to lift the curtain aside and to be able to see that manipulation for what it is. Now, most drinkers don't see themselves as drug users. They don't see the drug that they are taking as a drug. They see it as a normal beverage. They don't even see alcohol as alcohol, not really. You know, they see it as a glass of wine or a pint of beer or a shot of whiskey. Now, we live with a big disconnect between reality and fiction when it comes to alcohol. You know, if you don't see alcohol as a drug, how can you see the benefit in someone quitting using it? You know, how can you applaud someone for stopping using a drug when they are, you know, when you're still using a drug, I should say. You know, we applaud people for quitting something that we know is bad, like smoking or heroin, because we fundamentally see those things as being bad, as being dangerous to the individual. You don't blame the person, you blame the drug, and you accept that anyone who quits using the drug is doing a good thing in their lives. Now, when you don't see the drug as a drug, you can't blame the drug. When you don't fundamentally see the drug as being bad, you know, despite it causing over 3.5 million deaths per year, like alcohol does, that's 1 death every 10 seconds. You can't blame the drug. Now, when you use this drug, but you don't consider yourself to be a user, you can't blame the drug as well. You can only blame the person. They must be wrong. You know, there must be something wrong with these people themselves. They're weak-minded, they have a disease, they're alcoholics. They come from alcoholic families. They just can't handle the booze, so they are the ones that are to blame. You know, there are so many people in this world who drink alcohol and have no problem. But this is pure fantasy land. You know, how long did it take you, you know, think about this yourself, to admit to yourself that you've got any sort of problem with using alcohol? Years. I mean, I know that from personal experience. Knew I was doing something wrong smoking, and knew I was doing something wrong eating crappy foods. But drinking, I thought that was just part of who I was. And it's normally when something happens that forces your eyes open, that screams at you to look at what the fuck you're doing. You know, what is happening in your life and what you're doing to yourself. You know where the blame lies once you cop onto it. You know what's causing this to happen. Now that you understand the problem, once you understand the connection between you drinking alcohol and bad shit happening in your life, once you know that this is happening, how do you now look at your past life of using alcohol? You know, suddenly you can see the problems that using alcohol has been causing all along. Now, as a personal example, when I finally opened my eyes to what was happening in my life with alcohol, I began to see this just downhill trail of destruction that had been going on all along. You know, all the lost memories, the injuries, the bad words, the foolish decisions, the cost of alcohol use in my life. These were many, and it was everywhere. You know, once I opened my eyes to it, I could see it everywhere. You know, my past was just littered with the cost of these lost opportunities, things that I could have been doing. Now, most alcohol users are living in denial. Most alcohol users are, by any stretch of the definition, alcoholics. You know, look at them, watch people around you, and you'll see that what I'm saying is true. Once you've stopped drinking, you'll see this. Alcohol is defined through dependence. Now, most drinkers, those who've been drinking for any length of time at any rate, are dependent on alcohol for one reason or another, in one way or another. So, if you don't call yourself an alcoholic once you quit, then, you know, what do you replace it with? So, seeing as you don't drink alcohol, you're not an alcohol drinker anymore, you don't have to call yourself anything. You know, you don't have to call yourself one thing. You know, you don't have to link yourself with alcohol at all. You know, when you stop drinking, keep telling yourself that you don't drink alcohol anymore, that you're not a drinker. It doesn't take very long before the triggers, all these triggers that cause your alcohol use and cause that sequence to be triggered, that they disappear. And once that happens, you'll think about your old habits less and less. You'll have less of a disconnect in your mind between you telling yourself you don't drink and the fact that you're a non-drinker, and, you know, you feeling that you're a non-drinker. So, you know, you won't have this big pull. Now, I guarantee you that if you consistently don't use alcohol and you consistently tell yourself that you're not an alcohol drinker, it's going to become a part of who you are. If you go the other way, alcohol is never going to leave you. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this video. If you have anything that you'd like to see covered in the videos, anything you'd like help with, then let me know in the comments section below. Now, if you like this video and you'd like to help me out a little bit, then you can do me a big favor and take a quick second to click the like button below. I'm Kevin O'Hara for Alcohol Mastery. Until next time, onwards and upwards.